Good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of ClubDA, the Alumni Association of the Diplomatic Academy. And we had so many registrations that we moved from the Musiksalon here to the Große Festsaal, the great ceremonial hall. So we are very happy that so many of you can attend. And also our Secretary General assures me that the streaming works much better from here. And that gives me the opportunity to welcome everybody who is connected to us via the internet. Our club is one of the oldest alumni clubs in Austria. It was founded in 1968 and now has over 1,800 members from over 100 countries with 14 local chapters in Europe and the Americas. The club enables alumni to easily keep in touch after completion of their studies, and through its worldwide network provides strong support to the DA alumni on their way to a successful career. For the second time, we have organized this event together with Rotary Club Vienna, Maria Theresia, which has strong links to the DA, and I welcome Vera Strobachova Budway, who will speak to you shortly, and thank her and Ruth Bodgeman for the good cooperation in preparing this event. I would also like to thank the Diplomatic Academy for hosting us here. Vice Director Martina Schubert is with us, and you will also hear from her. Last but not least, I thank Anna Tutner, the President of SAGE, the Student Society advocating gender equality, for her input. My special thanks and welcome goes, of course, to the 5 speakers of this evening, who I will introduce to you individually later on. I now invite Martina Schubert, Deputy Director of the Diplomatic Academy, or the correct English title, the Vienna School of International Studies, for her introductory remarks.
Dear Vice President of the ClubDA, Ambassador Brigitta Blaha, dear past President of the Rotary Club, Maria Theresia, Mrs. Strobachova Budway, dear Mrs. Anna Tutner from the Student Initiative Advocating Gender Equality, dear distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It is a particular pleasure for me to welcome you today at this evening's event on the role of women in global crisis, which is organized with the ClubDA, the Rotary Club, and the Student Initiative Advocating Gender Equality. Today's topic, the role of women in global crisis, is of actuality for several reasons. First, because women are representing half, to be correct, 49.58% of the world population, and as such are also directly impacted and have a role in global crisis. Second, because tomorrow we are celebrating the International Women's Day, which celebrates the social, economic, cultural, and political achievement of women, and marks also a call to action to accelerating gender parity. Tonight's panel will give us a very good insight of the role of women in crisis, be it in relation to topics like energy, to a topic like climate, to food security aspects, many aspects in our lives. Women play a very active role in foreign policy. This is the case in international relations. Just recently, the German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has published guidelines for a new feministic foreign policy in Germany, which aims to ensure that women's needs are taken into account and that the perspective of women are integrated into the global work of peace and security. Many of those considerations are already lived or have been already implemented in other European foreign ministries, like in the Austrian Foreign Ministry. I guess one reason for that is that in Austria, several female foreign ministers have already been active. And also we Austrians are very pragmatic and do the real policy where it's necessary. As Deputy Director of this Diplomatic Academy, I'm very happy that 58% of our students are female and that we have very engaged women in our student body. Women policy is also very present in our executive training programs. We organize specific trainings for women from different regions who are in leadership positions with focus on international human rights and women's rights. With this, let me close my welcoming remarks and wish you all a very interesting and stimulating evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. I would now like to invite past president of Rotary, Maria Theresia, Vienna, Vera Strobachova Budway, to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Blaha. Thank you very much, Martina Schubert, and welcome everyone. On behalf of Rotary Club Vienna, Maria Theresia, welcome to this great event tonight. I again want to thank you and the Diplomatic Academy and Diplomatic Academy, ClubDA, for partnering with us. This is actually the second year that we've partnered with ClubDA, Diplomatic Academy, and the Diplomatic Academy to celebrate International Women's Day by organizing a discussion with really inspiring women leaders. So Rotary Club Vienna Maria Theresia is a group of globally minded international professionals from Vienna's many international organizations, institutions, and diplomatic, business, and academic communities. We focus on projects and activities that can advance our vision of a better world with the goal of improving the lives and furthering peace globally and in the community where we're active, with a focus on youth, education, and diplomacy. Under our partnership agreement with the Diplomatic Academy, we support both a mentoring program for Diplomatic Academy students, which is now in its second year, and also a scholarship for students, needy students of the Diplomatic Academy. Another interesting project that we support a Bright Girls Scholarship. It's a program for girls in Gulu, Uganda, which provides these girls with tuition, school uniforms, books, and meals for an academic year, because we do promote, again, youth education, and especially with a focus on improving the lives of girls. Gender equality is actually one of the core values of our club. 50% of our members are women. And also, it's interesting, I think over a third are graduates of the Diplomatic Academy, so we do have really a strong connection and tie to this very esteemed institution. But Rotary International has also made diversity and inclusion one of its core priorities, and it recognizes that its membership must reflect the communities that it serves. And women have been very active in Rotary. And I'm really proud to announce that for the first time in its 115-year history, Rotary now finally has a woman president for Rotary International, the global president, Jennifer Jones from Canada. So this is a great milestone even for Rotary, but it took a long time, 115 years. And there is still a lot to do, because globally only 23% of Rotarians are women. And there are 1.2 million Rotarians all over the world. So we do have a lot of work ahead of us. And it's sometimes very hard to believe, even for myself, that it was only in 1989 that Rotary International first accepted women into its ranks. So that's not a long time ago. Women contribute so much, and therefore it's only fitting that today's discussion will highlight the role of women in global crises. Women play a transformative role in diplomacy and peace building, and their voices need to be heard now more than ever. So again, I want to thank all the panelists for taking the time to join us here and for accepting our invitation, and I look forward to a very inspiring evening with all of you. And now I would like to hand back to our moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vera. The last introductory remarks come from Anna Tutner from SAGE. Please.
Good evening and a warm welcome. My name is Anna Tutner and I'm a second-year student of the Environmental Technologies and International Affairs program here at the Diplomatic Academy. And in addition to that, I'm the president of SAGE, one of the students' initiatives here at the Diplomatic Academy. SAGE, meaning Students Advocating for Gender Equality. At the Diplomatic Academy, we aspire to establish an equal environment for everyone by supporting gender equality through an inclusive, active, and intersectional approach to open dialogue, policy change, and advocacy. The SAGE Society deals with all different kinds of topics: racism, LGBTIQ+, environmentalism, the representation of women in positions of power, religion, disabilities, the role of men, and last but not least, mental health awareness. During the academic year, we deeply discussed our goals and activities in order to prevent and fight any kind of misconduct, discrimination, and sexual harassment within the premises of the DA. We believe it is of utmost importance to reach out to people and to include everyone into the discussion of the different spheres of gender equality. Gender equality affects all of us, but also benefits all of us. We want to create awareness, conversation, and spread of information by organizing different events and activities. For example, this year we, the SAGE Society, have attended the Vienna discussion forum titled Women on the Move in the Vienna International Center, which was a high panel discussion about the role of women in migration and human trafficking. Furthermore, we have organized an interactive discussion titled The Movements of Women and Youth in Iran with the A alumnus and human rights advisor, Dr. Homayoun Alizadeh. Our next activities will include the rewriting of the section of the student handbook concerning the code of conduct of non-academic issues, an interactive Q&A event related to the gender inequality in the digital space, and last but not least, for the third term, we set a goal to focus on mental health awareness among the students. I'm very honored to briefly present the SAGE Society today on the occasion of an event dedicated to tomorrow's International Women's Day. As SAGE Society, we will continue to fight for gender equality and a world free of prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination, for a diverse, inclusive, and equitable world. Thank you.
We will now proceed to the presentations of this evening. Our subject is, as you all know, the role of women in global crises, and we will touch upon three crises: climate, energy, and nutrition. And I would like to invite the speakers to come on stage, and I will introduce them to you individually. So the first speaker that you find on the program, Angela Reithuber, has not arrived yet. She is in Berlin on a business trip for the Ban Ki-moon Center, and she is hopefully joining us before the event is over. So we will start with Rana Ghoneim, here on my left. Rana has over 15 years of experience at UNIDO in the design and implementation of projects advancing the use of clean energy technologies in developing countries. Her work focused mostly in the MENA region and Africa. Since June 2018, she serves as the chief of the Energy Systems and Infrastructure Division, where she is responsible for developing the organization's strategy for promoting a carbon-neutral energy infrastructure and the decarbonization of industry. She leads on behalf of UNIDO global initiatives and engagement with global actors such as Sea for All and the Clean Energy Ministerial. Rana holds a bachelor degree in environmental science and a master degree in environmental economics from Imperial College. You have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this session. Let me maybe actually really start by telling Anna how heartwarming I find this movement that lots of young people are taking, and how great it is to really see how you're taking hand and hold of the future. I think that your generation is really going to pave the way for something that many generations didn't. So I really have very high expectations, and I really applaud you all for the work that you're doing. I mean, I guess fair to say, one of the only ones here from the Global South, and so I would like to bring that perspective as well. We're talking about crisis of energy, and yes, of course, here we're talking about how do we supply natural gas to keep houses in Austria and in Europe warm. But on the other side, we have more than 750 million people across the world, and particularly in Africa, that don't even have access to electricity. We have more than 3 billion people that don't have access to clean cooking fuels and still use firewood actually for that. And so when we want to talk about that energy crisis, I think it's important to think of how these figures are around the world. And women, of course, I think part of the existing narrative is women are the ones that bear the brunt of going to fetch wood for the houses in Africa. They're the ones going to fetch the water as well, and so they really also are very much affected by the energy crisis and by the lack of energy. At the same time, they're the ones suffering from climate change the most. You know, they are. I've met a lot of women that were even from Africa running away from fires that are starting up because of climate change. So yes, we might be just a bit more comfortable here to have a few degrees less. I mean, I am, because I'm from a Mediterranean, and it feels good to have the temperatures a bit warmer. But on the other side, there are many places in the world that are really facing those effects and firsthand on. I believe in changing narratives, and I believe that we are not here only to talk about women being, you know, victims of climate change or victims of lack of access to energy. And this is where, you know, why I love the work that we do at UNIDO and within the United Nations broadly, because there's lots of opportunities actually for women to change this narrative. And the ones that we focus on a lot are helping women in growing entrepreneurship and you know, developing technologies and business models that do bring climate solutions and energy solutions across the world in different countries. And we have many women, young and old, that are really thinking of very innovative solutions. And at UNIDO, we actually help them to bring these solutions into the market by helping in this business acceleration process and helping them go through what we call the valley of death. The second area is actually access to finance, because yes, it's great. I do have my bank account. I have here, you know, my independence in a sense, but lots of women across the world also still have lack of access to proper financial instruments to also help grow their businesses. So this is another area where we really work with financial institutions and try to develop better financing models that help women access better financing. Another area also is for sure policy and along with policy, also skills, because it's great to hear the numbers, and you said 20% across in the Rotary Club. It's not much different in the organization that I work on at a senior level. So we really need to make sure that there are some commitments from private sector, from government, from different institutions towards these gender equality goals. We need to make sure that there are policies in place that support this progression as well in the careers of women, and at the same time we need to work on developing systems that provide women with more the skills that are needed to also come into the workplace, but also to continue. So really, yes, we are facing very difficult times, and also inspired by Anna's last comment on the mental well-being. I think also we have to really start looking at that more closely, because as I see now with the global crises and many of those really inspiring women leaders at the end of the day quitting and coming back with burnout, we give a lot of passion in our work as well as women, and I would say it's time also that we really turn attention a lot more to this also. So yeah, I'll stop here perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, our next speaker will be Stefanie Lemke. She is the head of the Institute for Development Research at the Department of Sustainable Agricultural Systems at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences, better known as BOKU. Her work lies at the intersection of social sciences and nutrition. Her research experience spans more than 20 years, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. Her areas of work are the human right to adequate food and nutrition, gender, intersectionality, women's rights, food and nutrition security, sustainable diets and food systems, sustainable livelihood approaches, and the governance of natural resources. Professor Lemke applies gender transformative, rights-based, feminist, participatory and transdisciplinary approaches in collaboration with civil society organizations and local actors in the co-conceptualization of research. She also worked as consultant for various civil service organizations in the fields of nutrition and consumer counseling and livelihoods of smallholder farmers. Please.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Thank you very much for having me here to this event. I think it's also an opportunity to build networks and build synergies in the important work that we all do. These were a lot of big words that you mentioned on my work, and I would like to shed some light on some of them. And I will focus on women and their role in food for food and nutrition security at the occasion of the topic today. And I would like to address the structural conditions that pose multiple barriers for the participation of women, and that partly explain why women do not achieve their right to adequate food and nutrition. At the same time, I would like to emphasize that we need a much more differentiated view. We often talk about the women, the men. Who are we talking about? And our colleague from the youth already mentioned intersectionality and intersectional perspective. So it's very important to look at different actors in their different situations and places where they are and the intersecting inequalities they face. And I would like to explain the term for those of you who are not so familiar with it. So this concept intersectionality stems from feminist sociological theory and was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1987 and many other scholars. And it refers to the intersecting relations of power, inequality, and social hierarchies. And this is, for example, criteria like age, marital status, sexual identity, education, income, but also if people live in rural or urban areas determines very much what opportunities they have. So gender is one kind of critical power relationship, and we should not forget about the others. And often we use a more essentialist view or one-dimensional universal construction of people. And with this in mind, because of our topic, I would like to come back to the role of women in food and nutrition security. So for many women worldwide, agriculture is still a mainstay of their livelihood. Women produce food for their own household and for the market, and of course for men as well. And according to data that we have, women generally own less livestock. They have less access to new technologies, to extension services and credit. And this is true also for Europe. Women, a farmer is a man. If we look at the language, still in Europe we have lots to do in bringing women into, they are the farmers and not the farm helpers. So this is really a global issue. And of course, the numbers vary according to region. So again, we should not generalize certain regions or countries even, but we have to be very location specific, which specific area and situation are we talking about. And one issue that Rana already mentioned, women bear the brunt, for example, of energy supplies, but also of household chores and the care. And we're still not talking about this adequately. So the heavy and unpaid household duties is not accounted for, and it poses barriers to women for participating meaningfully in all kinds of activities. And I think everybody knows that when we talk about gender, we talk about the social construct. And this is why it's so difficult, because so it's about the roles of women and men in society and other people. But this is part of our societies, so we grow up in these societies, and this is what we find. And to change this takes a lot of effort. And I would like to mention that a major shortcoming of previous approaches in development work, so we had women in development in the 1980s, it was about bringing women into the economy. We had gender and development in the 1990s, so here we see from women we changed to gender. Then we had gender mainstreaming, and now we talk largely about women's empowerment. But all of these approaches or efforts had a distorted focus on women. They did not include men. And this is still a problem. So if we focus on the economic empowerment of women, which is important, but not only, we are often changing women to fit the system, but we're not making the system work for women. And this is the main issue I want to get to, the structural issues. So we're not addressing the structural causes of inequality for all people, the unpaid care work of women and girls, and the direct and structural violence against women and girls, which is often invisible because it's built into our social structures. And not addressing these different types of violences explains partly why women are still more vulnerable to food and nutrition insecurity, while at the same time they are the main providers still for families. And this is a huge barrier to women's participation. There's also a common perception that hunger, malnutrition, and poverty are characteristics associated to failure of people. But in fact, it's the failure of states to meet their obligations, for example, regarding the right to food and nutrition. And when I look at programs today in development in different areas, I often see that women don't participate fully and meaningfully, also because we don't look at the conditions that they face. Can they leave their children at home? Can they travel safely to the places where they're supposed to go? So are their life situations taken into account? And whether in research or development programs, this is, at least as what I observe, not the case. So we really need to take this into account more. Also an important issue is we have conventions and rights to protect women. For example, we have the 1979 Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. But if these rights are not implemented on the ground, nothing will change for women. We have great, women's rights in constitution. One example is Kenya, where women have rights. But I work with partners in Kenya, and the women in their village, they don't have a voice. They don't have a say. They're not able to inherit land, for example, and land is so important as a basis for food and nutrition security. If I don't have land, if I don't have security on that land, I can't plan for the future and I can't provide for my family. So what is the way forward? I think we need a broad transformation of societal structures, which is inclusive of everyone, but which provides the structures for women to participate meaningfully. If we look from a researcher's perspective, we don't have enough data. We need gender disaggregated data. So, for example, regarding access to land, regarding access to energy, to infrastructure, and so on. In some areas, I think we have data, but in others we don't. So we need to do much more research here. Also to convince politicians we need evidence. We can't do anything at the political level if we don't have the data for it. And I strongly believe that we should support the work of social, civil society organizations, social movements, and women's rights organizations. All over the world, we have lots of organizations, often small. We don't always see them in the spotlight, but they do great work. And what I try to do in my research is to link up to these groups and do things together. But I'm not doing the work. I'm not living there. It's not my context. But we can co-develop in terms of a transdisciplinary approach. We can co-develop what's important, and we can facilitate, and we can work together on these issues. So this is also breaking down the hierarchy between the researcher and the researched. It's something, I think, of the past. And I'm engaged in research in West and East Africa with social movements, farmers groups, pastoralist groups, and they're fighting for women to own livestock, women to own or have secure access to land, and they do lots of work on the ground. And if you're interested, maybe later in the discussion, I can share a bit more about this. So if the rights are not implemented on the ground, we will not achieve anything. And I think we still need a lot of advancements in this regard. And I would like to end with a quote that is quite old by Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the former US President Theodore Roosevelt. And this is from 1958, at the 10-year anniversary of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And she said, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet, they are the world of the individual person. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere." Thank you very much.
Very much. The next speaker will be Dr. Irene Gina-Reichel. She is the co-founder and senior advisor to the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition. She was a member of the Austrian Diplomatic Service from 1982 to 2021, served among other places as ambassador to the People's Republic of China and Mongolia, and to Brazil and Suriname. Her main areas of expertise are economic and social development, women's rights issues, environmental, energy, and development cooperation. She has worked on global issues, held numerous international bureau functions, and teaches and lectures widely on international relations and sustainable development. Ambassador Gina-Reichel founded the Global Forum on Sustainable Energy in 1999 as a multi-stakeholder platform for dialogues on energy in the service of sustainable development, and acted as convener for its global and regional meetings. She was also vice president of REN 21, and she is a founder and an honorary president of the Austrian National Committee for UN Women. Please, Irene.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brigitta, for organizing this event with your partners. Thank you to the Diplomatic Academy for hosting this event. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, I will follow on a little bit what Rana said about the energy situation of the global south, but I will take it to the global north so that we have that perspective also. And I will speak a bit about energy transitions. What do we mean when we speak about energy transitions? By and large, we mean that we transition from an energy system that is not sustainable for a number of reasons to a an energy system that is sustainable and that is compatible with the climate goals that we have set ourselves as an international community at the Paris negotiations inter alia. So why do we want to transition from one system to the other? Well, first of all, because we want to stabilize the global climate. That's our main priority here in the north, I would say. But then also because we are aware of the injustices that the current energy system causes in the global south, where, as Rana pointed out, so many people don't have access to electricity, close to 800 million according to the United Nations, and where 2.5 to 3 billion people still cook with inadequate cooking fuels that are polluting and bad for the health. But then, of course, as of late, an additional element for us to transition our energy systems are strategic and military security reasons. The war of aggression of Russia to Ukraine has triggered a very strong response from the European Union, sanctions, as we all know, but has also made it necessary to disentangle our energy systems here in the European Union from the dependence of Russian gas, mainly, and oil. So we have now, in addition to the sustainability element, we also have the energy security element, and we have the element of the needed strategic maneuvering place that we need to create for ourselves as European Union to do something about the current unsustainable and fossil fuel-based energy systems. When we transition towards another energy system, we need to remind ourselves that that is much more than a choice, a switching of technologies. It's much more than unplugging from a fossil fuel based source to a non-carbon based source. It's much more than just shifting the technologies it's something that requires a change in almost all societal issues, procedures, and relationships. And so it's a deep societal transformation that we need to engage in. And that deep transformation of societies also holds the promise for making our societies more equal, more inclusive, more participatory. And I think it's a chance that as humanity, as the developed countries for sure who are engaging in this energy transition early on, they are the first cohort. Of course, all countries eventually will follow. But that we have a real chance that we should not miss. Now, what does this entail? The current energy system is not one in which women participate equally with men. That has to do with very deep-seated unconscious bias. It has to do with gender stereotyping that affects practically all countries more or less in the same way. It's a bias that excludes already young girls from making choices in their educational careers that could then lead to careers in the energy systems. So currently we have, according to statistics by the International Renewable Energy Agency, we have a participation of about, at best, a third of women in the energy workforce, both in the old energy sector, there the percentage points are even lower, but also in the new renewable energy efficiency, sustainable energy workforce, the participation is at best a third. And mostly these are administrative functions and not STEM, technology-based functions, and not leadership functions. Now, when we talk about transitioning into a new energy system, then of course we need to make sure that the people working currently in the old energy system are helped to transition. We need to make sure that the regions that are, I don't know, the economies of those regions that are, for example, coal-based, we need to find a way of transitioning them into new economic models of development, new forms of providing livelihood to the people that live in these regions, new ways of developing these regions in general. But we also expect we expect that the transition to new energy systems will open up employment opportunities for many, many more people than are currently employed in the energy sector. And there we have the opportunity to early on open up the field to women and young women and student women very early on. If we don't do that, then we perpetuate the situation that is currently an unequal situation. Now, why is that bad? It's bad because energy transitions are deep societal transformations that require innovation and that require problem solving and that need to be able to draw on all the resources that are available in a given society. And all the resources, all the talent, all the life experience includes the life experience of women and men. So we simply cannot afford as a society to confront these challenges and deprive ourselves of half the talent. I mean, it's a very simple argument. How to do that is not so simple, because confronting unconscious bias and deep-seated stereotypes is complicated, and it requires the cooperation of many, many actors at many different levels. In the introduction, it was pointed out that I co-founded the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition together with 3 other women. We did so 5 years ago. Our network has grown to more than 3,000 women now internationally. And the things that we do mostly is bring groups of women together, as was pointed out by Professor Lemke. It's very important to bring those existing groups together and help them interact. So we create networking opportunities for exist, and we do mentoring. We work with individual women and help them to flourish in the difficult situations in which they often find themselves in the energy sector. And we advocate to make the sector in general more inclusive, to have better data as well. And what I'm doing here is part of this advocacy part. Thank you.
Maria Blumenhofer is our last speaker, or maybe the one before last. And she's one of our alumni. She was born in Regensburg in Germany in 1998 and has been living in Austria since 2019. Maria developed an early interest in international politics and cooperation. After a year abroad in France, her curiosity for international and public communication intensified, and she therefore completed a bachelor's degree in transcultural communication and journalism and communication studies at the University of Vienna. Afterwards, Maria started her master's degree in environmental technologies and international affairs at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna and the Technical University. This is the ETIA master program here at the Diplomatic Academy. She has been passionately committed to climate and environmental protection for several years, and is actively involved in the Austria UNESCO Commission in a dual role as chair of the Youth Advisory Board as well as a youth representative. In addition to these roles, she contributes to a broad range of youth-related topics and projects at the National Commission. Sustainable development is particularly important to her, as, and I quote, "Youth can only be offered a future if sustainability is granted." For this reason, back in 2018, she joined the climate movement's Fridays for Future and has since been involved in volunteer work in press and administration in Vienna. So we will hear now from the next generation.
Okay, thank you for letting me be here, and also thank you for organizing this event. I'm very grateful to be on the same board as so many inspiring women, which is very important. Representation is very important, especially in this topic. As you've heard, I'm very interested in sustainable development, and there are diversity and equality is mentioned several times in the Sustainable Development Goals, actually, in the Goal 5 and 10. So we see already that equality and inclusion are very important topics to reach a sustainable future. But for us to reach this future, we need to have the political framework for that. We are not only in a crisis of the climate, but also in a crisis of our whole system, basically. For us to be able to make this framework happen, we need to start from the basis. So we need to start with education, we need to start with inclusion, we need to start with diversity and open communication, and especially international cooperation. This does not only need to happen on the national level and on the level of our westernized world, but also needs to include all parts of the world, especially the global south, as we've already heard. Something that is very important is the representation of women in general in this topic. Us sitting here is a very good start, but we don't only need to have a representation in a small scale, but we also need to be represented on a large scale, which is why it is very interesting to see already young women being included in, for example, the climate conference, the COP. There is a youth advisory board going to the COP each year, which is actually very interesting, but has already been harshly criticized by several parties, which is a shame, as we have been criticized for going there as a holiday, something like that. Which is, it's sad to be told, okay, you actually don't have a voice, you're not as important, you're just going there to go there and not actually because you have to say something. The women in the climate crisis are especially targeted, not only as they are not as represented in politics, but all the topics that are connected to the climate crisis are getting even worse if we don't reach the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. What is very, very interesting to see that we have several crises going on. We have as I've already stated, the crisis of equality. We have a global health crisis. We have a crisis of education. And if the climate crisis proceeds, these crises are actually just going to get worse. As the Earth is getting warmer, there's going to be more droughts, there's going to be environmental hazards, there's going to be a lack of nutrition, which is most likely the women's topic. And during these crises, as they are getting worse and worse, women are targeted even more, especially during migration. There has been during migration and the refugee crisis, the crisis that is not only based around political instability, but also happened due to a drought in 2008. There has been a broad dangers for women, especially during the refugee crisis. There have been over 6 million unwanted pregnancies due to lack of preservatives and due to lack of education, especially sexual health education. And something that followed was actually over 5,000 women died due to those unwanted pregnancies and unsafe abortions. So as you see, it's not only a crisis for the climate, it's not only a crisis for nature and environment, but it's also a crisis for each and every one of us. And it's important that we don't only look at our small circle. The first people we always look at, because that's what we're used to as humans, is the family. Let's look at the family, let's look at close friends, let's look at acquaintances. But we also have to look at people beyond our bubble that are affected of this crisis. Not only those, us, we have a big privilege to be actually sitting here and to have an education to be able to talk about the crisis affecting us. But many people, especially many women, many girls, don't have this privilege. And with this privilege comes the responsibility to actually do something against it. During the climate crisis or other political crises, the first thing that usually gets left out, as we see already in Iran, is the education for women. And education for every and all of us is the baseline to make conscious decisions and to actually know our rights and to fight for our rights. And to be able to have this education, we need the political system, and we need us, out of a privileged position, we need to help include everyone of the affected people in the conversation about the climate crisis, and try to do this via international cooperation, not only of the Western world, but also include all people of this world. Thank you.
Our first speaker has just arrived in time, and I welcome Angela Reithuber. She's the program manager of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens and a passionate advocate for climate action and gender equality, with a strong professional background in leading international multi-stakeholder projects. She has worked for several years in strategy consulting at Boston Consulting Group, with a project portfolio focusing on sustainability in both the public and private sector. Throughout her career, she has lived and worked in various countries from Latin America to Asia. She is a certified trainer, delivering capacity building on human rights education and leadership. At the Ban Ki-moon Center, she is leading the program Elevating Agricultural Adaptation, advocating for climate adaptation for the most vulnerable, including female smallholder farmers. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm very sorry for the delay, but Austrian Airlines decided to strike today, so that was the reason. Yeah, and I've just been on a mission trip with Ban Ki-moon now in Berlin, actually for the program, so I'm also happy to now take the chance and report a little bit back what we did. Yeah, and I'm very sorry, I also missed now what my colleagues here said on the panel, so I'll try to keep it short, and then maybe in the Q&A session we can engage a little bit more. At the Ban Ki-moon Center, we work on the two legacies of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, so on the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. And we work particularly with current leaders throughout our advocacy work we do, and with future leaders, engaging young people in, for example, implementing micro SDG projects in their communities on several different topics. And I'm responsible for our Elevating Agricultural Adaptation program, as we call it. So what we do is we advocate for climate adaptation, so finance and also political commitment, especially within the agricultural sphere, so for smallholder farmers, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where people are most affected by the current climate change that's already taking place, and particularly women and youth who are at the forefront of this. Right now, when we look at the climate finance topic in general for smallholder farmers, and then I would like to talk quickly about what we see, what's the situation for women, is there are estimates that around only 1.7% of the climate finance actually goes to smallholder farmers. And we have to think that there are an estimated 500 million farms, which includes even more people, depending on that, in the world, particularly Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and also Latin America. Now, within the climate finance, we, since the Paris Agreement, the countries convened to come up every year, as of 2020, with $100 billion to climate, so both mitigation and adaptation. And we know the latest estimates are that in 2019, only 83.5 billion were actually provided by mainly the public sector to climate finance. So if you calculate this down and you think, okay, 1.7% actually goes to smallholder farmers, there's a huge gap. And we try, by talking to countries, to governments, but also to international organizations, to advocate for the smallholder farmers, that they also get the share that is needed of climate finance. But of course, there are also other pots where they could get the support. And it's also, if we look at the investment now on the finance side, there are many business cases also that this actually makes sense. There are estimations that about $1 invested in climate resilient agriculture actually can have a return of up to $10 of a mid to long-term period. So if you look at all of that, it makes a lot of sense. Why we are not doing it yet, of course, this has many reasons. Now, what we see, and we also travel to sub-Saharan Africa as well to visit their projects, to talk to the leaders also in the recipient country side, particularly on the gender topic and on women. There in some countries, they actually produce up to 70% of the food. So in countries like Mozambique, for example. And there is a huge gender gap in the productivity. That's what the data tells us also from UN Women. In the productivity that female smallholder farmers have compared to their male counterparts. And this can be, for example, in Nigeria, up to 30% of productivity gap of women compared to men. So why is that? And there are many reasons, and I think this is also one of the reasons we are very convinced that there is a lot of work to be done yet. It's a complex interplay of social and also climate-related issues. So you may have many norms and gender roles and responsibilities allocated that actually lead to time poverty of women, so that they have to take over a lot of the core work, etc. in general. It's also the lack of access to resources, so this might be finance, this can be land, property rights, for which actually you need to then get access to finance in some cases, and also inputs. And this could be for several reasons, either because they are not able to participate in informative kind of sessions where they will get informed about how to do, for example, rotation farming, or how to apply climate resilient techniques, how to access a market of crops, etc.
And then it's also due to climate change, many increasing labor that they face. For example, to fetch water, they have to walk longer distances, which again adds up to the time poverty they have. So it's a very complex interplay. However, that's when you start addressing these issues, and this is very much beyond the agricultural topic as well, you address a number of other topics for those women there as well. So how could we move forward? So what are possible solutions to that? And I think one important topic is besides the climate resilient agriculture, the techniques, also collecting their input, because they often have a lot of knowledge, what works, what does not. It's the diversification of income, for example. So to also support them in how you can actually deal with the harvest they have had, etc. How when the yields are down, and we just have to look now at the Horn of Africa with a huge drought, how can they possibly supplement then the huge losses of income, etc., with other sources of income as well. So they are at the forefront of the climate crisis, and particularly smallholder farmers, who are among the poorest in the world, are at the forefront, and that's what we are advocating for and working for. And I just would like to add now, also from the conversations we had in Berlin now with ministers and also State Secretary Jennifer Morgan, and Ban Ki-moon, there is also from the German side a lot of understanding and support for this topic, but we all agreed that sometimes I think we have to be careful that we are somehow in a bubble, and we talk a lot about how important it is, women empowerment, youth as well, particularly also women empowerment, but then if you go at site, like in the countries as well, or even to institutions who are gathering the data, you kind of notice that it's not the topic has not ended in the practices that we do in companies, in governments. So it's more something, yes, we do that, check. But particularly when it gets on the data gathering, when you want to have gender sensitive data on the ground as well, it becomes very difficult. So this is also for us, I think, a big reminder to be careful what we talk about, etc., and always take a close look what really happens on the ground, and if we really have understood what is needed there on the ground, particularly for women. Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you all for your very valuable contribution to our subject. Maria even mentioned other crises like health, migration, but I think we will focus and limit our discussions on the three crises that we mentioned, climate, energy, and nutrition. And I would like to open the floor for questions. Please say your name and your affiliation. And I will take three questions. All three men. 1, 2, 3.
Right.
Herbert, please. Yeah, coming also. Sorry, but yeah. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Herbert Kort. I'm an alumnus here from Diplomatic Academy. I'm very pleased to have been invited. I am the chairman of a company. We are operating globally on 5 continents with more than 40 production sites. And diversity and gender diversity as such is a big issue, and we take it very seriously. In fact, in the board, which I'm chairing, we have 40% women, and in the first and the second leadership ranks, we have 33% women. And here is what I wanted to say. It's very interesting and encouraging to listen to all of you. And when I hear that women empowerment is so important, I agree. But I would highly advise that we start even a bit further, that is in education. What we see, for instance, in Brazil, when we bought Magnesita, the Brazilian society had brought forward many more engineers, female engineers, than the Austrian society has been able to produce, or others. So what we do see is that in Brazil, it's so easy, it's much easier to promote women to a higher position, because the intellectual and educational level is there. And be careful not to take the wrong conclusions. The fact is that when we have an internal tender process, in every position is being tendered, and there is a basic rule in the last 3 candidates, there must be at least 1 woman, so 1 female candidate. So here in Brazil, it's easy. In the rest of the world, it's very difficult. In China, it's almost impossible. So this has, Ms. Ambassador, you may know much more about China, of course, but maybe the old Confucius still doesn't allow the equality of women to men. But in any case, I would like to bring forward the argument, please try to get engineering educations, things like that you need in environment, that you need in agriculture and everything else. Thank you.
Thank you for a comment. I think well received, and probably we can agree around the table. Donatus?
I'm a retired Austrian diplomat and also an alumni from this academy. Financing, I was waiting for microcredits. Is this still a hot topic, as it used to be when Mr. Yunus started inventing it, especially targeting women? Second question, when I served in Kenya in the 80s, there was a powerful and dynamic lady, Wangira Maathai, who created the Green Belt movement. Now, you hear about this drought in great parts on the Horn of Africa, but including especially in the north and east of Kenya. Is this still something that you are advocating and supporting? And one question arises, that's right here in Europe, what the Spanish government was just starting to, I think, put in action. The Spanish government already has, I think, 55 or 60% women within this government. And I think Sanchez is now promoting that in all the major companies, state-owned companies, definitely, there should be 40% of women in the top echelon. Is this, according to you, the right way to try to impose this by law, or does it have to grow and promoting women's empowerment and getting women in all these areas? I think I'm not talking now, I think in peace building, we should have a lot more women active in this field. Thank you.
Thank you. Last in this round, Sasha, sorry. Vera, you'll be next.
Thank you very much. I'm the 3rd alumnus of this institution taking the floor, but I'm also the current president of the Rotary Club Vienna Maria Theresia, and I would like to point out to you that both organizations have a woman front and center in their logo, so maybe that is a good setup. For my question is very simple. Listening to you was, well, I would like to say inspiring, but really what it was deeply, deeply depressing. The picture you painted about the state of women, in all the details, is really quite, dejecting, if I may say so. So my question to you is, and you can answer, each of you, or one of you, or all of you, what is, in your opinion, or your vision of this situation, for example, the women being forced to fetch firewood and do the cooking, this energy question. Let's take one question. What is it going to, the ideal state in 50 years, in the year 2073, when this problem will be resolved, and what will be a realistic way to get there? And if we can nail that one down, then we'll go away with a lot of inspiration, for which I thank you already in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to answer the question about microcredits and the Green Belt movement?
Yeah, sure. I think if it's okay, I'll answer a couple of them. Well, first, thanks for the male allies. I would say we need males as well on this side of the. So this is one thing we certainly advocate for. I mean, you're asking whether the right thing is to set targets. Actually, yes, why not? I mean, you know, of course, we don't want to see someone who is not fit for the position, but the society needs to recognize as well that it's not okay to have 5 men speak about the future of our energy systems, because there are very qualified women who can do that. We might not be at minister level, but nevertheless, we have useful perspectives to bring. So this is this societal norm thing that we need to change, and the injustice has been going on for a long time, so fair enough, you know, let's battle it step by step. And for me, I think, you know, that again, that's a personal issue. My sister there might not agree with me. In fact, she is also a leader within the UN, but, you know, I think that's fair enough. This is where our differences of perspectives bring us to something more meaningful. Microcredits, absolutely, they are still an issue, self-help groups and so on, and the issue is how do you drive more financing, you know, or credit guarantee mechanisms and use, you know, the larger pots of financing to serve those, you know, individual women or micro and small enterprises, because at the end of the day it's always more difficult to really serve those that are smaller, don't have the same guarantees to offer, are more riskier for the investors. So for sure it is still a topic that we work on, and I just would say sorry if we've made you feel depressed, not at all. I think that's why I started with painting that picture, but to say that we want to change that narrative. And for me, changing that narrative is investing in women becoming solution providers. You know, it's really bringing to light the story of the Kenyan girl who really serves communities and provides access to electricity to underprivileged communities, because that's a challenge that she sees. And she, as an engineer, you know, started developing these technologies and going around. So we need to call for more and bring these stories more to light. I mean, sorry if it came out as depressive. We tried to highlight more what are the areas of action that we need to bring on. And I think what I hear from across data, for sure, leadership and training and skills, financing, giving more opportunities in the workplace. So while we try to paint that picture, I think I heard from all of us here some solutions on how we could overcome that. So yeah, maybe I'll again stop here, and I'm sure my other fellow panelists have more to add.
Yes, please.
Yes, I think I can link to this. I would like to point again to the structural issues, to the societal issues. It doesn't help us if we continue to focus on women. It's still, in my view, a distorted focus. We need to bring in men, we need to bring in the youth. We have some youth representatives here, they still feel sidelined at these large events, as we heard. A major issue that I see with the organizations I work with in Kenya, the Kenyan Peasants League, the Pastoral Women Council in Tanzania, and also 2 organizations in Mali and Guinea. They need they need advocacy for the politics to have secure tenure to land. All of these groups, smallholder farmers, pastoralists, indigenous groups, they are threatened to lose their livelihoods, and they will be even more food insecure in future with climate change and the climate crisis, and they are among the most marginalized, but we're not supporting them. We had many programs in the past pointing to supporting smallholder agriculture. We have it in the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 2. The main support should go to smallholder farmers. But what is happening in reality? We support big industrial investment. We have few food corporations, the global corporations who control the seed market, who control the major players, and this undermines the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, men and women and youth. And we really have to make sure that access to land is secure. So we need, as I mentioned before, the social movements and the human rights groups. We need to support their ongoing initiatives. They're not always inclusive, I have to say. They're not always including women as they should. Sometimes you might hear, first we fight for the land and then we deal with women. And that is, of course, terrible to hear something like this. But there's lots of the social mobility going on the ground, and they need security, because otherwise the food insecurity figures are, again, rising. And in 2030, we will be at the same level like in 2015, when we started with the SDGs. So yes, it's not a positive picture, but I think that's why we need to get to the structural issues. We need to support the conditions for women, for them to participate meaningfully, to have their full potential mobilized. We need men in support of women. We need men to come in with the household chores, with childcare. We need policies to support this. We have some small advances, but there's lots to do. So if we don't look at these issues, nothing will change. So I would really advocate to change this focus on women only. We need to look at the society. We need global solidarity, and we're all threatened. And also the issue of migrancy. We will not stop it if the youth in many countries don't have a perspective, if they can't access land, if they can't go into farming. So there's like lots of broader issues, but where I get my strength in these quite difficult and challenging times is working with those organizations on the ground who are trying to change things. And I just want to mention one issue, which is what we see in Kenya, is community dialogues. So we have to start small. If things don't change on the ground in the household, nothing will change. You mentioned, does it help if women get into politics? Yes, but that's not the only thing. It doesn't come back to the ground. We have some countries with strong political women leaders. It doesn't mean that the women on the ground have more rights. So we need to start small, and this will have effects to other households, to other communities. We have social media. We can share a lot today, and we need men to advocate for women's rights. And we need the youth also, the male youth, not to feel sidelined, but to advocate for women's rights, for everyone, for the better of everyone. So really these global issues, the food crisis, the energy crisis, it's all linked, and the climate crisis above all. But I think we need to refocus where we put support. And just the microcredits, yes, I believe they are good, but it's often they keep people just like going on, surviving, but they do not go into the big changes. So the local food systems, the local energy supply, more governance, food sovereignty, people need much more control of the environment where they live. They can't depend on the big companies because it's too expensive, and they will not reach this food that is produced there. So yeah, sorry for the long.
Thank you, Maria. You will be around in 2073, so maybe you want to answer this question. What would be the ideal state?
Yes, I'm just going to make 2 comments on those topics. I have positive news. As we know, the climate crisis and the energy crisis is also a very female crisis. I see a trend of more and more women going to the STEM subjects, as me and Anna are also studying environmental technology. And from what I've seen is there's a very, very good trend of more and more women applying for these programs, which is also on the basis of less inequality and more encouragement towards this direction. So you're definitely right, and I'm very, very happy to see that more and more women are in those subjects. And for what you said, that was about the Spanish government and the social incentives of including more women. Already in the climate crisis, we have seen that the social and logical incentives were not enough. Not even the imposed laws by the government were enough. So participation of each and everyone and of all genders, I think that's just a positive thing. There's nothing else to say about that. And now about the what would be the ideal state of the world. So I can say that very naively. I think that we still have a lot of hope. As there was a global climate protest already on Friday, you've seen the hope in the eyes of the young people, and you've seen how motivated they are to change something. And it is very obvious that change still is possible. The pathways are still achievable that lead to a path under 2 degrees. We already conquered a crisis like that with the ozone depletion in 1991. And we saw that by listening to science and by actually doing what the scientists say and to cooperate on these levels, we managed to completely avert this crisis. So the ozone layer almost completely recovered, and I am positive that we would be able to change that as well. But that's only the case if we include economy, include women, include youth especially. The ideal state of the world would be managing the Paris Agreement, of course, and the states actually trying to seek through their nationally determined contributions, because the change has to happen in any way. So it's only about those 2 factors. How much is the environment going to be affected? How many people, animals, and plants are going to die? And how big will the loss of biodiversity be, and how much it will cost? So it's only about the environmental impact and the finances. The change will happen if politicians want it or not, if the economy wants it or not. It will happen because there is no other way. So for me, it's quite hopeful that there will be big changes, but I seriously can't say how the path there will be, because unfortunately there's still so many pathways possible, but I'm very, very hopeful that we're going to achieve that.
I wanted to follow up actually on what Herbert said and ask about the role of business. He gave an example of his own company, which was interesting in terms of the internal tender process, and you've also mentioned some of the negative sides of major business, including control of resources and seeds and so forth, and technology. So I just wondered if you could talk about that. What are the, what can be done, what needs to be done in terms of the, both multinational as well as at the local level. And then since especially Stefanie, I think, was talking about the community level dialogue and work and starting small, I just wondered if each one of you can make this at the end if you like, could maybe give us one example of something small and tangible every one of us could possibly do for sustainable change. Thank you. Oh, and thank you all for the excellent panel.
Thank you very much. My name is Angela Kane, and I was a long-time civil servant, international civil servant at the United Nations. So I've had my share of fighting my way up from the lowest level at the P2 level to the Undersecretary General level, which I had for a fair number of years. And I found it very interesting that what you all said, and that was very illuminating, but I agree with the previous speaker who also sort of said that it was very depressing, and I think we know what it is. And of course the question to me comes immediately, what are we actually going to do about it? And one word that has not been mentioned yet, and I think it's very important, is visibility. Where is the visibility of women? You are now the panel, five women panelists, a woman moderator. But if you look at other panels, it is very hard to see even more than half of the panel being women. And one of the issues, and we're talking about the microfinancing, etc., is also, I would think that the visibility, if you had a woman as the head of the World Bank, would be a fantastic achievement. And there isn't enough advocacy for that. There isn't enough fighting for these positions that are visible and that can actually make a difference. And I differ with you, what you were talking about, we're fighting to have one woman among the 3 finalists. I don't think that's enough. I'm sorry. It's basically, it has to be more. And I also believe, and I was for a long time, when I was at the United Nations, I was against the so-called quota women. The General Assembly always said you have to have so many women percentages, etc., which we never achieved. But on the other hand, I didn't want to be a quota woman. I didn't want to be chosen because I was a woman and I fit a quota. I have changed my mind, because I think when you look at, for example, the Nordic countries, why do they have such a large representation in government, which is where it makes a difference, is because of quotas. And it is unbelievable to me, for example, that here in Europe, the European Union has decided that I think it's 30% of the board membership of the companies over a certain size, and particularly those that are held by the government, have to be women. That's not been met. Why? Because it's not enforced. There's no penalty. You can sort of nod to it and say, yes, 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 we'll try, but we can't find enough qualified women. And that, to my mind, is absolute nonsense. And I think it needs to be said very openly. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Nina Hechenberger, Secretary General of Diakonie Austria and Bread for the World Austria. So we are the ones running the projects in the countries you are talking about. When it comes to global crisis, we do focus on women, we do focus on food sovereignty. Yeah, we are totally aware of all the problems women have as small-scale farming, not having access to crops because of international businesses, holding the right to sell the crops, and dealing about developing and development, and going for the game you opened, like what would it be in 50 years, In the rare case that in 50 years all the so-called developing countries are developed, this would go together with growth, this would go together with carbon footprint. And what would you tell a woman in 50 years from the so-called developing countries? Are they allowed to develop or not? Thanks.
Irene, you wanted to answer the question about the role of business?
Well, I am not in a position to answer any questions, but I'll offer a couple of comments. It was very interesting to me to hear how you saw the situation in Brazil and in China. In China, my experience was that the second in command in practically all the institutions, including companies that we dealt with, was a woman, but hardly ever the first in command. And the political system in China is such that it doesn't give visibility to women in the political representation at all. I mean, this is, I was at opening of events where there were 16 opening speakers and they were all 16 were men. You would think there are no women in China. But at the business level, the second in line and the one who really ran the business, very, very often we dealt with women. So I hope that you're more lucky in the future in finding those women. I think there are any number of studies from McKinsey, from the World Economic Forum, Davos, from any numbers of entities that show that incorporating women in the boards and the decision-making level actually yields better results in terms of the company, in terms of the bottom line. But then we also have the studies from the World Bank that go back to the year 2011, where the World Development Report was devoted to the issue of gender and development. And the World Bank, who is not exactly a leftist organization, found very convincingly that it's good for the national economies, also it's good for the societal developments if women participate better and more equally in the workforce. But I would also like to come back to the challenge that you put in front of us. I was involved in the women's conference, in the International Women's Conference in 1995 in Beijing. Through a number of coincidences, I chaired the preparatory committee for that conference. So I know what the negotiations were about. And I also know that since 1995, we were not able to convene another International Women's Conference. And we didn't because we would not achieve what we achieved in terms of consensus in 1995. So we have to be very realistic that the issues of the equal participation of women in society, which is a fundamental human right, which has been one of the core outcomes of the Viennese Human Rights Conference in 1999, that women's rights are human rights, that is under threat by any number of groups that claim any number of political agendas and hide behind all kinds of religions. And it's a power struggle. And it's also a power struggle that dovetails with the struggle for the use of natural resources. The social dimension of sustainable development, of which the women's issues is one dimension, and the sustainability, the ecological pillar of sustainable development, they are very, very closely aligned. And there's a power struggle going on around these issues. And we cannot let governments off the hook either. It's good, we can all contribute to making the situation better. Everyone can do a small thing to make it better. But at the end of the day, it's also something where governments need to take a stance, and we hold our own governments accountable for that, because it is a power struggle. It's just as much a power struggle as oil and gas, and renewables. I mean, it is about distribution of power. It's about controlling resources, and it is about influence in society. And it's not something that will go away anytime soon.
Okay, would you like to speak about this question it was a comment more, but visibility?
Happy to, yes. On the visibility of women, I was immediately thinking of COPs, of the climate conferences. So if you go there, the participation of women in the negotiations rooms, on the panels, is rather low. And of course, as also with businesses, and at every point and at every level, may it be a community level or at UN level or government level, whenever it comes to decision-making points, the participation of women, of course, is fundamental. Now, I don't have the solution how we get there, because I think it's sometimes also deeply rooted in societies. But what I see and feel is what's important is, and this leads me also to Ruth's point on what can we do on sustainability, to empower also each other. Because every woman and also man, but as we work together, I think to further proceed in the career, etc., needs also, as with man, this community also who supports her and empowers her to actually also apply for the next step, etc. So this is important, and I also would like quickly also to quote on the microfinancing topic. there, for example, what's interesting is the WFP, so the World Food Programme, they kind of throughout the years also shifted their approach. They have now an ever-growing number, and I think it's around 40% or even more, on actually direct finance support, except when there are crisis moments, of course, that's kind of food supplies. And they're diverging more from this resource support to finance support. And how do they do it? They channel it primarily through women, because they know that whenever they give it to women in the household, the finances will be managed better, rather than giving it to the man in the household. So this is. This for me is also related to the question of the power dynamics and finances, etc. With microfinancing, I'm also I think we have to be very careful there, because in some instances I think the burdens that are put on women are even more dangerous than the short-term effect of giving some money there to them. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on this Bread for the World question about the development of developing countries?
Thank you so much for your comment. I cooperate closely with Bread for the World in Germany, and also Miseria, and I think they do lots of great work. As you said, this links to what we heard earlier, the struggle for resources is getting more and more. And it's a power play, yes. And the powerful don't like to give away what they have, whether it's in holding positions or resources. It will be more and more. So we will see this more and more. And that's why I strongly believe that we need social mobilization. We need civil society. We need the concept of food sovereignty that you also mentioned. So we really need to look at those groups who mobilize for their rights, because yes, no government. That governments need pressure, different pressures. In some countries we can't. People, they pay with their life, and we see this in many countries of the world. And we have lots of human rights defenders worldwide, and they put their life at risk, and many have lost their life. But the broader the mobilization, that really helps. And we need to unite. So the fight for land or land reforms, you can't say women, we deal with women later. I mean, that's like half of the people not being present. So this is still a lot in the minds of people. And so I think we have to start small in our environment, in households, but also at the big level, at the policy level. But the mobilization is something I believe in. And I mean, whether it's the youth mobilizing, also we see now recent things that also Bochum, my university, engages in the climate action, more visible. So this wouldn't have happened maybe last year. Something is moving, yes, and we have to move, we have to do something. And to achieve equity and fairness, I mean, we need, maybe I can just say, if we had gender parity on boards, on whatever we do to achieve gender parity, changes the dynamic of the discussions. And often we still see the majority of men, and especially in Africa, the countries where women would not speak. They would not easily speak in those fora, but they get more voice, they need to be more seen, and they need to have a voice like the youth, not just sit in a workshop and participate, but actively participate. So, I believe the power plays that we have are there, and they are not getting easier. But I think we need to challenge them, and especially the big food corporations. If I could come back to that issue, the global players. And some of those big global players who direct the big food conferences and hijack. Don't allow civil society and those efforts that have been there, the World Trade Organizations and others. So what I tell my students, if I may address to Ruth quickly, what can we do? So I say be critical, reflect critically on what you see, also in terms of climate change programs. We heard about the Great Green Belt, the Green Belt movement. Now we have the Great Green Wall. I'm a bit, as a German, to hear something like a wall is a bit threatening to me. But who is benefiting from these efforts? Also in terms of, we do something now for the climate. Who has to leave the land? who has their livelihoods there. So if we see these big and grand programs, just to be critical of who is part of the benefits and who is not. And I think that is one step, and that also students can be critical about this. All these big programs that sound very nice, you know, or we need to feed the world, then I'm always very skeptical when I hear this. Who is feeding the world? Nobody is feeding the women and the organizations I'm working with. Yeah, they will not get the benefits. So to this kind of pictures that we get into our head, to be critical about this and talk about it and try to do something about it.
Thank you. I think we'll have the last round of questions now. Anna, you raised your hand, back there, and Susanne.
My question would be following the ideal state regarding it. What would you say, how do we make sure that we as a whole society don't burden this responsibility of climate adaptation and access to clean energy solely to women or solely to the younger generation? That was my question.
Question? With the blue sweater.
Hi, my name is Valeria. I'm an entrepreneur, and we didn't talk about that and how important that would be. I mean, we talked about the global south, okay, entrepreneurs there can do well and can be good, but when I read the Handelsblatt, and everybody knows that because maybe you read that today, 59 women on boards of 199 DAX boards. It's still a way to go. We have still here in our home countries and in Europe, and I think something super underestimated is the financial independence also of women in Europe. And yesterday I read a paper, 20% of married women, they don't care about their finances and they rely on their men for their pension like settlement. And I think, and maybe that's the question also for you, because I really, really want to encourage more women to play with that and to be financially independent and use what's out there for investment and to play the game of the big ones, because that's the game you have to play to really change something. It's good to be in international organizations. It's really, really important to do like all these papers, and I've worked for a long time for the European institutions. I've been a lobbyist for a big corporation, and then I thought, okay, what can I really do to have an impact, like real impact? And I thought, okay, being an entrepreneur is one thing where I can really change something. So I would encourage all the young women among us also to like go that path, maybe seek for something apparently small. It looks small in the beginning, but the real impact can be so huge. And if we get more into these spheres and we get more into the finance world and we get more into the investment world, we can also, I think, steer what's happening in the world, because there are investment funds that look at SDGs. There are possibilities to invest in this kind of way. So that's the question also for you. What is the impact of the global north and the finance system, and what can we do there?
Okay, thank you. In the second row, just...
Thank you very much for your distinguished speeches. My name is Benedikt Höfter. I am a second-year student at the Diplomatic Academy and very glad to call both Maria Blumenhofer and Anna Tutner my colleagues. I wanted to ask something about something that has been touched upon earlier about the social and cultural aspect of the inequality between men and women. In my undergrad, I did a social econometric study on developed economies, highly developed economies in Europe. And my findings were actually quite staggering that countries like Germany, who have the concept of what in German we call a Rabenmutter, which is quite a derogative term attributing women who are supposedly not fulfilling their duties as mothers, that countries like Germany, for example, who have this term in their culture deeply ingrained, tend to perform weaker both in the equality between men and women in econometric, in the economic sense, in the sense of women having less access to secure jobs, for example, but also in social regards, compared to comparable countries like France, for example, which is very comparable in size and economy and human development index, but is offering much more opportunities to women, especially single mothers, young single mothers, to both succeed economically as well as socially as having a family. So my question would be, how can we drive that cultural revolution that obviously needs to take place also in the center of Europe, where arguably the corporate revolution is already much more advanced than in the developing world? Thank you.
Okay. There was one more question here in the second row, please.
Hello, my name is Susanne Sherman. I'm a university teacher. Thank you very much for all your insights and all the interesting questions. I'm continuing a little bit the last comment. We were talking a lot about the problems that women face in time of global crisis. And I think we should also stress the solutions that women can offer in time of crisis. I mean, I'm not at all a specialist, but for example, because women often do the cooking, maybe if we target at them, do a different style of cooking, of heating, and so on, they can make a difference. So I would, not to be too depressing about the problems we face, but what difference can women make? What positive difference? It's not just, well, we're all in this together and don't miss out one half of the population, but because we are women, because of our role in many different societies, what difference can we make? And if you have even anecdotal some stories you could share with us, I thought this would be a nice thing and a kind of positive idea. Thank you.
Okay, there was one very last.
Thank you. My name is Gabriela Abado. I held several executive positions, but now I'm working as a leadership and business coach. And in that role have, of course, meet many people, men and women, and discussing especially the topics that we are discussing today. Now, I would like to pick up on what was said about the role of men and the need to get men into our discussion circles and the need to even men advocating for the case of women. Now, the thing is, what will make them do this? I hear a lot when I talk to managers, they feel women as a competition. Women are now on the jump to getting into their positions. And I hear many times this famous glass ceiling exists for men as much as for women. So my question really is, what should really be done about that to have an incentive for men? And I found it very interesting what was said here by I don't know him, would like to talk to him afterwards, about getting the female engineers. Yes, we need female engineers, but what is going to happen if the male engineers are then not having to leave the meeting at 4 o'clock and fetching the children? It's still the female engineers who do that. So in other words, if it's not becoming acceptable that men take on a different role, and if we are not maybe helping them even to take on a different role in society. I don't know, I doubt that anything will really change. And maybe we should even have such a panel with men also sitting there, so we provoke a discussion. That's a question I would like to put to you. Do you think that this would change something? Yeah. So one thing that also was not mentioned was the role of role models. We women have, I think, done a good job and come a long way of finding for ourselves role models, of also, you know, presenting women as role models. Now, what about the men? Do they have role models for a new picture and a new, let's say, reality of a new life reality for them? There's still very few. Where are they? What can we do that also men, you know, find role models? In reality, this means that the manager of a department basically has to say, it's both the men and the women who are supposed to take also family duties, and it is normal that this is being done. So my question to you is, what actually would be real steps in that direction? And how can we really include men factually into such a discussion as we have today? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So basically we have 5 questions now and we have 5 panelists. So maybe you can choose which question who wants to answer. First, Anna's question was about women or youth.
My question was regarding how do we make sure that we don't hand over this responsibility to women and to the younger generation.
Who would like to answer this question? Or
I mean, I like the optimism that you feel, because I think we're still far from that, right? Like, I think the whole discussion at the moment is how do we bring women and youth more to the center, that they're still part of the decision making now, because otherwise it's too late. So I find it like optimistic that you think everything is going to be handed over. On the contrary, I think because a lot of decisions are going to happen today, for example, in the energy sector, a lot of industries, large industries like steel and cement and so on, they need to change boilers. These are like really large machineries that burn a lot of fossil fuels to make steel and cement and so on. So a lot of investments are being made today to change these, because they're coming to the end of their lifetime. We need that, you know, those decision makers take into account issues of sustainability and you know, this is where, you know, we really need to bring more perspectives of women and young people who are caring more about the future. So I think we are still far from like handing over that responsibility, but we should like really focus on ensuring that they're part of the decision making, especially that a lot of decisions now, I mean, I would also like to maybe point out to these examples or anecdotes, because you know, today in Europe we need to work on shift away from gas, and that on its own actually has been very positive, because it accelerated the adoption of renewable energy, not necessarily for the purpose of climate, but because we want to cut out the reliance on the gas from Russia, right? So that is very positive. And yesterday I was looking at an article which said actually the EU more or less reduced around 30% dependency on natural gas. And actually, we have 2 super inspiring examples of women in the EU that are leading all of this. The EU Commissioner on Energy, Kadri Simpson, as well as Leonor Gewessler from Austria. So there are very promising examples of women there right front and center dealing with it, but there's also a lot of criticism, and sometimes we have to also acknowledge that there's a lot of criticism that sometimes might not face a man but would face a woman. And we need, you know, going back to these cultural and stereotypical examples that we need to eliminate, we really need to make sure that at the end of the day that is a person. I am here today because in my family I was never treated as you can do this because you're a woman or you're a man. For me, I'm an individual. I have an endless opportunity that I need to pursue, and I need to make this world a better place. So that's where I would like to contribute. So yes, plenty of anecdotes. Women parliamentarians in Africa really looking at and pushing for legislation for climate adaptation, as well as food waste and all these different, there's plenty and tons of example of how women are also trying to drive this, but I feel like this is really can be a one-day seminar perhaps, where we really try, because we're like touching the surface of many of these topics, but not really going into in-depth. And I would love to contribute a lot more, but I think we're also pressed on time. So my recommendation is maybe a workshop later. That would be lovely. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So you have already also touched upon some aspects of other questions that were put. The impact of the financial world. Who would like to talk about this? Nobody. I know that you have raised your hand to answer the question of the role of men and what would what can we do, what makes them do it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe, yes, I would like to respond to you. So, yes, I absolutely believe in role models, male role models, also female role models, of course, in the communities in Kenya and in Tanzania where we work, where the groups that we work with are doing the work. They have really gained some male role models, younger and older men. And we had a group of 7 pastoralists, Maasai, coming to Kenya, and we had together a community dialogue. And it was so amazing seeing these men speaking to the community that had met, because they were so inspiring. They talked about their experiences being part of the project. So the project is women's rights to communal land. That's what we're working on, and it's in the spirit of UNDROP, the new declaration on the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas. So that is very convincing, and we saw a change, and that on that day we saw a change in the men who first felt sidelined, and yeah, the women sing and dance and they are active, and the men are sitting there like, okay, this is somehow against us. We had to separate the groups, so only when men had left, women spoke immediately about sexual violence, domestic violence, and the men spoke for themselves, and then we got back together, and this elder Tanzanian Maasai leader spoke to the men and to the fact that daughters are buried outside a fence. So there was a story in this community. Daughters of unmarried women are buried outside the fence as if they were like, not part of the community. And that something happened on that day. Now you can say this is only one event in one community, but these youth male and elder male leaders, they go and speak to people, and this will have an effect. And I strongly believe in this. Something will happen. So this is the small level, and then we have the bigger level where the social movements and the civil society organizations also fight for women's rights. Something is changing also, I think, in the role models, and maybe quickly responding to Benedict, if I may. I see changes. I'm very impatient, and it's not going fast enough. But we see more young men wanting to stay at home with the children, wanting more connection. That was not the norm in the past, and absolutely in Germany we had this term Rabenmutter, and we had women after the war. Women were first at the forefront to build everything, and then they had to go back home. And look at the advertisement. It makes me very angry when I see the advertisements of women being a good housewife, looking after their husband and so on. And only in the 1970s, women were allowed to open bank accounts in their own name. And up to the mid-70s, they had to ask their husband for permission to work. Something has changed. Still, a lot of things have to happen. And it depends also the field we are working in. So in agriculture, farm succession in Europe, I said before, we also need to look in Europe. Absolutely. Farm succession is still very much to the male, to the sons. It's in Austria, in Germany, and many other countries of Europe. But it's slowly changing. So we just have to push for this, and we have to have these good examples, and other women and men just looking to these people and taking that example. Thank you for your comments.
So. Thank you. Maybe you have now already partly answered this question about the cultural revolution and social and cultural inequalities. You would like to maybe talk about stress solutions that women can offer Friday for Futures is maybe a good example, where we have both young and women at the top leading this movement.
Yes, the thing is, we need to have mostly an inclusive climate awareness and also an inclusive approach to feminism in general. Feminism is not only about women, even though it's in the name. It started with actually black transgender women, but now is a complete term for all types of equality. And we see that that communication and the framing of a situation has incredible effects on how the situations is perceived in society. And as you said, Benedikt, about the Rabenmutter, we also have the term in English, the single moms that are usually penalized for being the parent that stayed, instead of judging the potential male partner that left. So the whole framing of situations and females in society is the big problem that we actually have. The choice of words that the words that we choose in talking about women and talking about equality have a big impact on the framing in general and on the effect it has on the whole society, not only in day-to-day communication, but also in the media, also in social media, also in politics. It is important to not only say, okay, women are not equal to men, but women should be empowered. A complete positive framing of the problem is imminent, and I think that would be a good start to actually allow women to frame themselves as a part of society that has a lot of potential in bringing new ideas to the table, new perspectives to the table, due to the cultural differences that came from historical inequality, a complete female culture that was forgotten. You were talking about anecdotes. Actually, something that I just found out at the Biennale in Venice last year was there was an exposition on female culture and the female history, and that the first tool not actually was a knife or a stick, as many of us believe, but it was a bowl for collecting. It was something that's historically more female, and it was a female job. So we need a complete shift from only looking at history and culture and the society from a male perspective, but also include women's point of views and women's ideas to be able to generate a sustainable future that's including all parts of society.
Thank you. I will give the last to Ambassador Gina Reichel, and maybe also you want to say a few last words.
I want to take up the Rabenmutter question again. I live in Tirol, I'm from Tirol, and childcare facilities in Tirol are so much worse than they are in Vienna, for example. It's a cultural thing, it's deeply ingrained in the tradition, etc. And to change that, to make more childcare available, I think is a step that one can demand from a government, from a provincial government, from a municipal government. It's easier, I think, to be obtained than to change the mentality around the issue of Rabenmutter, which I think also needs to change. But that's part of what we spoke before, calling it, gender stereotyping, unconscious bias, etc. But simply to make available childcare so that women who wish to work can work reasonable hours and not just from 9:30 to 12, because then the kindergarten has a break and the children need to be collected. These kinds of things. would be a step in the right direction. And the Scandinavian countries, France, they all have these facilities available. I would also briefly want to touch on what you said. How can we prevent women being burdened, women and youth being burdened with the problem of solving the climate change? And I think your question comes out of a very acute awareness that women tend to assume responsibilities more than they should often. I think it's good to assume responsibility for what you should assume responsibility for, but it's not good to think that you have to right everything, that you have to make every wrong right? It's not healthy to think that you have to be the savior of everybody. It's not healthy to think that women have to solve all the problems of the world. And yet we are brought up very much, we are socialized a lot in this direction, all of us. In relationships, in family, where the women are socialized in such a way that we look after others and solve the problems of the larger whole. So I think this is also a process of learning for what we can take responsibility for and what not, and be secure in saying, yes, this is a problem, but it's not my problem, and I'm not going to solve it. And I think in general, in this whole gender discussion, we need to be very careful not to put the blame at the end of the day on individual women or individual persons, because this is, after all, a structural problem. And we need to be aware that a structural problem can only be changed through changing the structures. And any individual person can make as much of a contribution as she or he can and want. It's not possible to solve a structural problem through individual action. And that, I think, is also very, very important for us women to remember. As a positive example, I'll give you the example of networking. We have, in the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition, we have lots of experiences where women, through peer interaction with other women engaged in the field, one network interacting with another, they strengthen each other. They see that women can be visible, and they kind of keep the ball rolling, Each woman talks to another woman. So one thing that we all can do is to encourage a good woman in our vicinity, to encourage them and to help them continue. Thank you.
Thank you. So the very last to you.
I keep it short. A lot was said. For me, I think in every work we do, and I think everybody who is here has power and responsibility and also influence. It's that we do not forget to assume that we know what's best for women, particularly those who are further away from us. But really to encourage to every time, as you also said, Stefanie, think critically, listen, also particularly when we think about cultures and societies that are maybe a bit further away. And this can also already be kind of a community within our own country, within Austria, but particularly when we work with other countries, that we do not live and assume that we have the right solutions at hand, but we do a bottom-up process, have community conversations, which sometimes may take more time. It's not so convenient. You have a lot of obstacles and different needs there. But I think that's empowerment. It's really giving, supporting and kind of giving them, empowering them so that they can have and use their voice. And so finally, I think this community dialogues are also something that we need more, also in Austria, in probably our closer communities, maybe in different forms. I do see that there is a generational change when it comes to men taking on different roles, at least in my bubbles, I have to say, now talking about Austria. But I also worked in a very male-dominant industry. And there is a change, and there are clashes between the generations, but it happens. And so now when we leave today, maybe for each and every one of us, keeping on having the conversation, even in the closest environment, is always, I think, is the most crucial part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I would like to thank all the panelists for their insightful and inspirational presentations and thoughts. I hope enough positive ideas have been presented to you so that we are not all leaving very depressed with the situations. I thank the audience very much for your attention, for your patience, for your questions, and as a reward, you are now all invited to have some refreshments next door. Thank you all for coming.